Indeed, those aspects of yourself that you'll want to change most acutely are likely to be the ones most resistant to change.
Bing, 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 bing. I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets
gross.
the people going.
This video is no panacea, it's no silver bullet, but it does suggest a personal psychological framework that might help. I suggest happiness, or what I prefer to call satisfaction, is the result of a balanced triangulation of the three essential elements of one's social life: who I am, what I want, and how life is. The formula for satisfaction goes something like this. You need to bring your wants into alignment with what life can reasonably provide. Sounds simple. If the things I want are the same as the things life offers me, I ought to be satisfied, right? But here's the rub. You can only establish this alignment once you understand life as it is, rather than how you'd wish it to be, and most importantly, you can only come to terms with how life is when you understand yourself. Why is this the case? Because you and I are different. We have different qualities, skills, attributes, personality types, tendencies, preferences, and so on. And because of these differences, life manifests in very different ways for all of us. Because life manifests in distinct ways for all of us, our experiences of school, the office, making money, or making friends are different. Now, a strict realist might argue, but the office and the school are the same for all people. You're not actually in a different reality. The difference is all perception. It's all in your mind. This is an utterly disempowering and pointless argument. Since we only experience schools, offices, businesses, and friends through our minds, and as such they exist only as perceptions, whether they are some abstract existing phenomenon is completely irrelevant. In fact, no one has any way to access things in themselves, only ever a mind picture of those things that we then interpret. In any case, this slight divergence into something like a Kantian epistemology points us to the most important and first step towards satisfaction. Who am I? Until you get a grip on who you are, that is to say, a proper understanding of your strengths, weaknesses, talents, failures, temperament, issues, and so forth, you won't have the proper lens through which to ask questions about how life really is. The world will forever be a mystery if you can't see the relationships between what you do on the basis of who you are and how the world manifests itself for you. Once you get to know yourself better, you stop thinking that the world that appears around you is some uncontrollable enigma that drags you from pillar to post and buffets you like so many leaves in the wind. Instead, you say, I see, Y happened because I did X. Critically, this gives the opportunity to consider, if I want A to happen, I really should stop doing X and start doing B instead. Now, this teases how we bring about our wants into alignment with what life can reasonably provide, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We have to start with who am I? Coming to terms with yourself requires a level of paranoia and self-criticism that many people find uncomfortable. Nevertheless, it is entirely necessary. Start by saying, I'm not perfect, but I am perfectible. For whatever reason, I have developed, inherited, or been imprinted with certain mental modes and behavioral traits. Some of these are useful and generate beneficial outcomes, others are unhelpful and stimulate undesirable consequences. The challenge is to identify which are which. The main way to go about this process of identification is to reflect upon specific situations. Think about the last time something happened which you either liked or didn't like. Now imagine that everything that happened was the direct consequence of things you either did or didn't do. Now, at this stage, it's not important if that's true or not. This is just a thought experiment. What is important is that the situation is a real one and you think very carefully about what actually happened, in as much detail as possible. So let's take it as an example. You're in the gym. You try and approach somebody casually to see if you can strike up a conversation, but it doesn't go the way that you wanted. Try and think very carefully about how you went about doing this. Assume a bird's eye view How quickly did you approach the person? What did you say? What was the tone of voice? What were you thinking at the time? How did you feel? What were you hoping to get out of the interaction? Okay, once you've examined all of this, say to yourself, things didn't work out based on everything I did and didn't do. In other words, there is a direct relationship between the undesirable outcome and your particular behaviors. Again, it's not important if this is accurate or not. You'll notice in this example, the person that we've approached in the gym has no agency whatsoever. Fine. The point is to develop the capacity to identify how we exist in the world. Key signifiers for the question of who we are. We're trying to establish the predicate that you are a very specific assemblage of traits, characteristics, and behaviors, and that these traits, characteristics, and behaviors manifest the world around you and establish the kind of life you have. Enact this process of self-examination again and again and again. After having meditated upon good and bad situations in this way for a considerable period, perhaps intermittently over many months, you'll develop a picture of who you are based on what you do, think, how you behave, and how you exist in the world. Now we can get to work. What do you like and what don't you like about this picture? Preserve and fortify what you like, reform or jettison what you don't. Remember, you're imperfect, but you're perfectible. Now, some of these traits are going to be harder to deal with than others. Some can simply be affected by a simple awareness and then choice, others by habit. Still others, however, you'll find are far more stubborn. Indeed, those aspects of yourself that you'll want to change most acutely are likely to be the ones most resistant to change. Why? Because they are aspects of yourself you've developed over time to protect and defend against the world. These traits are extremely hard to give up or modify because they are ostensibly existentially necessary. The best way to tackle these extremely sticky behaviors and tendencies is to try and understand what they are doing for you. If you frequently do X, despite having identified X as a particularly unhelpful trait, what does X do for you? Often the act of doing X or dwelling in X is a perverse act of self-love. If that's the case, then the only way to get rid of this trait or behavior is to replace it with another that achieves the same thing. You will not simply be able to eliminate this trait or behavior without swapping it out for something that addresses the need it was fulfilling. Human psychology, just like nature, abhors a vacuum. Let's say the trait you don't like is that you talk too much and you don't give other people a chance to have their say. Why do you do that? Because you want people to think you're smart or interesting or funny and so on. You're not going to stop doing this until you find another way of achieving the same thing. It is clearly important to you that people think of you in one of these ways. Now, perhaps in time, you might be able to calm your desire for these needs, but initially at least, you'll need a substitute behavior that grants you some of what you need so you can jettison the undesirable behavior of talking too much. One idea might be to opt for a change in strategy, take a more mature, sophisticated approach. Since you've identified that you talk far too much because you want people to know how smart you are, what if instead you decided you would make one really smart comment based on what the other person said? This would be a double win. First, you'll be smart for being a great listener, and then smart again for having something useful to contribute to what your interlocutor was communicating. Okay, let's recap what we've discussed so far. Satisfaction is the result of a balanced triangulation between who you are, what you want, and how life is. The first stage on the journey to satisfaction is to know yourself. You come to know yourself by meditating upon situations where you either had positive or negative outcomes and assuming your behavior, emotions, and thinking were decisive in shaping those outcomes. You carefully consider exactly how you felt, what you did, and what you thought in these moments, and over time establish a picture of how you are and how you exist in the world. Generally speaking, the traits and behaviours that commonly accompany situations with undesirable outcomes are the ones you will seek to modify or abandon, while the traits and behaviours that accompany situations with desirable outcomes are those you fortify, multiply, and preserve. Many traits or behaviours can be changed merely by acknowledging them, or simple decision, or by repetition and habit. The most stubborn of your undesirable traits or behaviours, however, will be those that serve a defensive or self-preservative function. The only way to let go of these most challenging traits or behaviours is to identify the psychological need they serve and find an alternative strategy or behaviour to fill this specific need. Try to think of something more virtuous, heroic, mature, or classy that does the same thing for you, so the need is addressed without having to resort to that undesirable behaviour or trait. In the next video, I'll discuss understanding the world as it is and how to bring one's wants into alignment with what can reasonably be expected of this life.